One of the pieces for the project out one at a time, but the overall print time was probably 35 or 40 hours for the entire project. After each piece printed, I had to do quite a bit of sanding to get rid of the build lines and get it as smooth as I could. I couldn't get rid of all of it, so I used some filler primer and did several coats to fill in the gaps in between the layers. It's really important that after you spray this on and let it dry, you do some sanding and do multiple coats until you get it as smooth as you want it to be. All of these different pieces had build lines in them because they were a lot of different types of shapes. The curves and the domes definitely had a lot of easy to see build lines. I printed this piece out of a transparent filament so the light would shine through it later, and it came out great. All the build lines got filled in with primer, just like I said before, sanded and filled again before I took it to paint. I used my brand new paint booth to put on several coats of orange spray paint, and I probably ended up doing 5 or 6 coats before I got a good solid finish. After I was happy with the paint, I went over the whole thing with some satin clear coat. And here's everything all finished painting. I used a Sharpie to finish adding detail to these panels, both the fine and the normal tip. It was way faster than painting and ended up looking just fine. I also used some CA glue to add these details to the panels in no specific position, but just where I thought they looked good. I also used CA glue to hold these posts in on the inside of the dome. These are where I'll put the magnets. Now, of course, it would have been better to model these in place and to model holes in them to accept the magnets, but I didn't do that, so I had to use a drill bit that was the same size and try to drill a very shallow hole to put these magnets in. I filled them with super glue and then forced in the magnets. They fit all right, but not as well as they would have if I had modeled the correct depth for the magnet to sit in. Then it would have been sitting on a flat bottom and would have been perfectly flat on the top edge. I put a dot of white paint right in the center of both of these magnets, and then I set on the mating piece. When I pushed down just barely, it transferred some of that paint to the mating piece, so I knew where the center of those holes should be. I followed the same process here and drilled really shallow holes, but instead of super glue, this time I mixed up a 2-part epoxy. This mixes up thicker with the idea that it would fill some of the gap and make it easier to place the magnets at the certain depth that I wanted them to be, and it actually ended up working quite a bit better. I had to wait a couple minutes for it to dry, but then it was ready to go. I tested the piece, and even though they didn't lay perfectly flat against each other, they did line up really well, and that was good. Then it was time to glue on the handles, and I just did that with some more CA glue. I was really conscious here to try to make all of the pieces attached to this one plate, so that the dome on the back could be pulled away without it connecting to any other pieces or electronics. I glued these in place and just held them while the glue dried, and then it was good to go. It was actually a really big relief to see these pieces come together and fit even with the handles in place. In the digital model, I measured the space in between these panels, and then I used my calipers to enforce that spacing as I attached them. I used some super glue on the bottom of each one of these pieces to hold them in place. One thing I will say that it was really important to go back and sand the bottom of these pieces so that they were perfectly flat and they would lay flat against the surface. I had to glue in this crystal piece before I could finish putting on these panels because it didn't fit to drop it right down in. I got it roughly centered in the area before adding the last 2 panels on the outside. I had a big nerd out moment once I got it to this state because it actually looked like the thing that I wanted it to look like. It was super cool. The last thing for me to figure out was where to put the switch, and I decided to put it on the handle right on the outside of the dome on the back. I traced the outline of the switch and then used a sharp knife to score that line. I used a drill bit to quickly remove a lot of the material. I really wanted to knock out a whole section so that the switch would fit right down on the inside. I did a few test fits and cut out a little bit more material to make sure that there was room for the wire to run through. Then I set all of the electronics in place on the back side and used hot glue to hold everything there. Hot glue acts as an insulator for the electronics, and it makes it really easy to pull these out in case I ever need to redo anything or replace anything. To mount the battery pack, I used this 2-sided Velcro strip. I put down some barge contact cement both on the prop and on the strip and let them dry for about 5 minutes. After that, when you stick the 2 pieces together, they immediately bond. And it was finally complete. I just snapped on the battery pack and held it in place with the Velcro, and then lined up the back panel with the magnets and put it in place. I learned a ton of stuff from this project, and there are a lot of things that I will do different next time, but overall, I am super happy with how this turned out. It's the first time I've made a prop that started in 3D modeling and went all the way through to finish in electronics, and I'm really glad that I've covered that gamut now. I think the next one's gonna be even better. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.